natural forms have a kind of elegance and a kind of perfection, really, which keep making you want to fathom the mystery of that elegance, the mystery of that perfection. You know, I mean, and that's why in any given period, whether it's a Sung Dynasty Chinese painter, or whether it's Redon, or whether it's Matisse, or whoever it is, we are to some extent all talking over time about these mysteries, these particular sensual delights that, you know, are still with us. And if they weren't still with us, then I think they would be very frightening, you know, because we would have lost our touch with those feelings. I think printmakers have a natural tendency to really love the feel of the ink itself, the kind of sensuousness of it as it spreads onto the glass. I know I do. It's the sense of already beginning to work with the material. I use rollers a lot. My monotypes are really, to some extent, more dependent on rollers than they are on brushing ink directly onto a metal plate. I start with a very, very dense black in what Degas called the dark field manner, that is, drawing into the black plate and making whites and lights from a dark background. I work from the amaryllis. I have a sort of a thing about amaryllis. They are forms which constantly intrigue me. They're very, very sensual, unpredictable, lovely forms. Here I am simply beginning to draw into the black ink. The rag allows me to pick up the ink, which wouldn't happen if I just used my finger. And the luminosity of the whites is so great in this particular method because the white of the sheet, that is so near the surface, like a watercolor, it seems to shine through that when I pull out the mark from the black plate. I use my hand a lot, as you can see, mostly patting things down with my palm, softening edges.
It's an unknown experience. I don't know when I start to work what's going to happen. I might prep for it a little bit by thinking about what I'm going to do in advance, but it's ultimately what happens stroke by stroke that determines the direction of the work. And very often the destruction of a stroke or a group of strokes is more important than the making of them.
And then I'll take terps and open up a passage in the black ink. Here a section of amaryllis. And then I'll take a roller and open up that section. Just let the roller move across the turpentine, and the turpentine will pick up on the roller. Then I can work back into it. It leaves a kind of scum of turpentine on the surface. So it will read as a partial tone, but it also lets me add color in there very easily. The turpentine thinning down the color. And I'll use the roller to either erase with or to add tone into the area. But also leaves roller marks and evidences of the work itself that are all part of the process for me. Here I'm adding a fairly loose red into the section of the amaryllis, and then I'll roll over it and pick up little parts of it. And as you can see, there's sort of a kind of inconsistency in the rolled section, which allows me to model the form really in a very different kind of way than one would if one tried to shade directly or to model the volume in some other way. for me it's very important to let those tools do certain things which only they can do. Even the sense of the rag wiping away, the kind of stem becoming striated by the rag itself in the way, in fact, stems look with those kind of striations. These images work fairly quickly because I tend to finish the drawing of an image in maybe no more than 20 or 25 minutes. And I want to be able to move through a series of images. This would probably, these two large prints would take perhaps no more than an hour, so that in a day's time I might make 3 or 4 or 5 or even 8 of these images, learning each time what I want from them, so that the pieces become studies and finished pieces at the same time. This finish is always redefining itself. Some things are finished, as Matisse's monotypes were, as simple white lines, maybe 2 or 3, done in a space of maybe 5 minutes or less. Sometimes it can be in a very elaborate kind of complicated process that tends to demand finish, so that the time is a much, much longer time over which many more details and many more acts are happening. There's a friend of mine, an artist, who once said that a piece is finished when you first sense it's almost finished. Once you start going further, you begin to ornament it in a way that it very often doesn't need. This keeps, because of the need to print within, let's say, an hour or so of working, it keeps your definition of what is finished relatively loose. I've added this second plate because it's going to be a long, narrow print. I can't print the whole thing on my press, although there are some presses I could do that on. Here I use 2 plates, the same size. The lower plate will be just for the extension of the stems. But that plate, that stem extension is going to be very important in terms of the whole movement upward in the vertical form. And here they kind of move to a ambiguous ending, not in a pot, but simply themselves. I'm not really carefully studying, in a certain sense, the particulars of the flowers in front of me. Yes, they give me information, but I'm really in some ways working as much with my back to them and trying to have them come through my head and through my memory and come onto the plate as some formal solution, not simply some kind of copying of the flowers. To see these, sometimes I have to stand up on a stool in order to get a view down onto the plate so I can see the whole image before I print it. But even when I'm looking at the image before printing, I'm not 100% sure of what's going to come up on the plate. I have a pretty good idea, but I'm always surprised. The next process, of course, is printing, and I have to run it through a press in order to transfer the ink to paper. The press will put it under an enormous pressure, and you need a great deal of pressure to print these images. It isn't, as some people feel, just a surface printing that needs very little pressure. In order to pick up all the detail, you need as much or more pressure as you would need printing and etching. On this sheet of paper, which is a make-ready for the press, I've traced out the sides of the plate so that I can put the plate in that rectangle each time, and I know it will be registered well on the sheet. Under this homosote with the plastic on it is a wet pack that I keep so that I have damp paper ready for me to print with. You need to dampen the paper to print with it. You've got to get the sizing out of it and loosen it up so it takes ink. And this is as true for a monotype as it is for an etching. When you print on a paper that really isn't properly wet, all kinds of surface problems occur in the printing of a monotype that you wouldn't expect. And as many or more as in a normal etching. My press isn't motorized, but it will be someday. And you'll notice the blankets go up on a pulley in the old-fashioned way that older printmakers of the earlier part of the century, especially engravers, used to design their presses so that the blankets would stay out of the action to some extent, even though these are still slightly dirty from handling. But basically it keeps the blankets from moving or shifting while the printing process is going on. Another one of those ways of keeping sort of technical things out of your way. When you lift the print off the plate, it's always a surprise. It's always a sense of excitement to it. And then the surprises are both negative and positive. Sometimes things happen in which just add a great deal to the sense of the print, which you didn't really suspect would happen. Something coming through, some piece of color that is transparent. Now I'm ready to print the second image. I'll do pretty much the same thing I did for the first one.
The most important aspect of monotype is really knowing when to print, because you have to remember you're working on not on the thing itself. You're working on only on the plate, which is going to make the impression that becomes the thing, so that contact with the paper and finally the pressure of the press is what makes the image. And to know to be able to read the plate, to be able to know how much ink is on it, and to know if the time is right to print. That's sort of the secret, you know. It's not a question of me not knowing what I want. Well, maybe it is a question of me not knowing what I want until I see it.
After you print, it leaves a residue on the plate, so-called ghost. We're looking at that now. It's amazing how much ink is left on the plate, even on an etching plate. And so I go back into it. I know that the background will be a kind of light gray and that there will be kind of transparencies. And I'll start to add material that is stronger in a certain sense to beef up that ghost image. But also I can change the focus, you see, in this case, from the lilies to the amaryllis beneath them. I'm not trying to fix up the image. I'm trying to remake it again, as if I found a certain amount of imagery already made, but now I have to expand upon it. And I work again with the roller, drawing directly with the roller. I like the awkwardness that sometimes gives me, a certain sense of not being able to get fussy with the line. But line should figure too, and so the brush works along an edge and just clarifies it. And here are the two, the cognate and and the first print that you see here, black and dense and very contrasty, compared to the second image, which is very soft and transparent almost. It's exciting to have those two elements working together in one image, both the contrasty and the fragile.